The Man from Venus. When I was maybe 8 or 9 years old, I guessed I must have been 8 because my parents got divorced when I was 9, and my dad comes into this story. I got angry at my parents for one reason or another and went for a bike ride. I was living in the suburbs back then, and it was kind of a weird area. Mid-sized industrial town in Indiana, part of the Rust Belt. All the factories had closed down by this point, and the air always smelled like a paper mill, or like dead fish after it rained. The street I lived on wasn't far from the industrial district. It was a circular suburb with houses on the edges, and a smaller one-level apartment blocks in the middle. I took my bike out of the garage and started going around the circle. There wasn't anybody around, and it was gearing up to rain. Heavy humidity. The smell was nearly unbearable. As I was coming to the end of the circle, I noticed a car parked near my house that I hadn't seen coming out. It was maybe 2 houses up, in front of the Clifford's house. It was an older car, pre-1980s I'd say, though my memory is of course less than perfect. I noticed the shape of a man in the front seat, and I was already nervous. Nothing about it was particularly strange yet, but this was around the late 90s, and maybe this was just in my town, but there was some kind of abduction terror going around. We had people coming to school almost every week scaring us out of talking to strangers, and every TV show or news program seemed to have some kind of child abduction twist to it. So I was keeping my distance from the car. As I went past it, the man in the driver's seat leaned his head out and says, "Come here." I don't remember his face too well, just his hair. He was completely bald except for a black ponytail that looked like it went down to his ass. I didn't even say no, I just rode past him and home. My heart was racing. Man, I was and still am terrified of and for children getting abducted. So I went into my house and went up to my dad, who was playing it cool after the big argument we'd all had about something I can't remember, and told him there was a fellow in a car parked a few houses up who wanted me to come with him. My dad made a face, and I told him something was weird about the man. So my dad, not wanting to really deal with it, called up the Cliffords. I can't remember the man's first name, so let's stick with Clifford. Clifford went outside and up to the man in the car, me and my dad watching through the window. Clifford and the guy in the car spoke for a minute. Then Clifford went inside and came back out with a gas can. They spoke for a bit more, and Clifford stood there a while staring at the man, then went inside again. The phone rang, and it was Clifford. My dad and him spoke on the phone for a bit, and my dad had a very strange expression on his face. He put down the phone and lit a cigarette and drank a beer, and we didn't say a word until I asked what had happened. My dad said not to worry about it and went outside. I watched through the window while he walked up to the car, and him and this guy spoke for a while. My dad was shaking his head the whole time. Then all of a sudden he broke off mid-sentence and walked back home and called the cops. The cops showed up a while later and talked to the man in the car, who eventually drove away. The cops followed him with their sirens on. About half an hour later, they came back to our house and took a statement from me and my dad, getting a physical description locked down. My dad refused to tell me anything. What he talked to the man in the car about, or what Clifford had said on the phone, or why he had called the cops. He just said, "They lost the man in the woods near our house." A few years ago, I was having a beer with my dad and asked him about what had happened, because of course I was still curious. I spent the next 5 years of my life, well into and after puberty, until we moved, worrying about that man skulking around in the woods. My dad told me. Clifford went and talked to him, and the guy said that he needed gas. Clifford asked why he didn't call a cab, and the man said he didn't have a left leg, that he couldn't walk anywhere. Clifford looked over the window, and the guy had 2 legs, unless one was a fake, which would still mean he'd still be able to get into a taxi. So Clifford goes and gets him the gas and comes back, and he asks where the fellow is going. The fellow says he's going to Venus, and he can't get there on half a tank. He said he was going home. So Clifford called my dad, a little nervous I guess, and told him. What the man in the car had said to my dad was pretty much the same thing. I need to get to Venus. Can you get me some gas and maybe some water for my dog? My dad looks in the back seat, and there is a dead dog lying there. It came out later that this guy had been driving around the neighborhood for a few days, saying random insane things to people out walking, trying to steal dogs. The cops chased him into the woods after my dad called them. They found the guy's car and the dog in the back seat, but never the man himself. The Serpentine. This took place in 2013. After graduating college, I was about to embark on a summer-long road trip that I'd been planning for over a year. At the last minute, my friends bailed on me, but being the adventurous sort, I decided to not let it stop me, so I packed up the guitar and went on my way. This is how I came to be a 26-year-old girl, road tripping it across the country alone. Since I was very poor, I was camping in national forests or rest stops and living out of a borrowed minivan. All was going well, and I was having the time of my life. However, a few months in, I had made it to California and was traveling around the Vallejo, San Francisco area. One night, I was looking for a new place to camp out and found myself on a Bay Area highway wrought with unusual detours. Because the detours were confusing and poorly marked, I found myself driving through a small town, uncertain if I was still following the detour or not. It was about 9 p.m., but since it was a small town, no one seemed to be out and about to ask directions from. I tried to use my phone, but the signal was crummy, and my phone sucked to begin with. Figures, I mumbled, and threw my useless phone on the passenger seat. It seemed I was getting out of town and into some kind of warehouse district, but I could see the highway up ahead in the distance, so I decided to head towards it. The single road I was led me towards rows of factories, but there was nowhere to turn off. I was still headed towards the highway, so I kept on. I passed a large old car. I'm terrible at identifying cars, but it's kind of like what you call a boat, very cool classic car kind of thing, in the parking lot of a factory. When I passed, he switched on his headlights and pulled out behind me. I honestly didn't think anything of it. I figured the poor guy was lost too, and followed me thinking I knew where I was going. I continued on for a while, with him still behind me, and I finally reached where the highway passes over the road. Much to my dismay, I turned a corner into a gravel lot of sorts that dead-ended into a fence right underneath the highway. There was no way to get onto the highway. This is where it gets creepy. The gravel area was about 2 lanes wide, but the large car pulled up behind me directly in the middle, so I couldn't get around him. This raised an immediate red flag, but I tried to convince myself that he was just a lost guy and his parking in an inconvenient way was merely an accident. However, I didn't want to get out of the van and ask him to move, so I began trying to come up with a plan. I pulled a little farther towards the fence, as if trying to make a U-turn. I already knew that there would not be enough room, but what he did next frightened me. As the nose of my van came up against the fence, he pulled up to the fence too, at an angle, blocking me from going any further. Now, I knew he was up to no good, and now I could get a look at him, as we were very close to each other. He had a baseball cap, a crazy ZZ Top style beard. To give you a picture, I was in the right of the 2 lanes with this crazy man blocking me to the left, and to my right was 3 cement pylons, running the length of the lot with a car width in between them. Here's where I take a bow to the gods of dumb luck, as I saw something in those pylons that most would not. You see, prior to this road trip, I had spent 8 years as a bus driver, and much of that time was spent training new drivers. One of the maneuvers on the commercial driving test in my state was called the backward serpentine. To pass, you had to back the bus through 3 cones positioned in a straight line. Since the cones are only a bus width apart, not length, you must turn at exactly the right time to master this move. It was very similar to what I was looking at now, although doing it with cones is a little different than a cement block, because if I crashed into a cement block, I would certainly not be able to drive out of there, and who knows what this man had in mind. I gunned it in reverse, keeping the maneuver I had taught so many in my head. Keep in mind, driving tests are graded on accuracy, not speed, so this was the first time I ever had to do this fast. By the time I made it around the second pylon, he realized what was happening, but because he had a big car and was pushed up against the fence, it took him a few wiggles to get turned around. By then, I completed my maneuver and took the fuck off back down the road. He followed, but there was no way to know if he was chasing me or fleeing, as there was only one way in or out of this place. I was scared because I was still lost, and presumably this guy knew the area if he had picked this spot to wait for lost tourists, so I wasn't out of the woods yet. Pumped full of adrenaline, I screamed out the open window, "You picked the wrong girl to play driving games with, motherfucker!" I then heard a tiny robotic voice say, "No results for driving games, motherfucker." I was confused for a minute, then remembered the useless navigator on my phone, which I had discarded. It had been flung to the floor of the passenger side during the ordeal, and I wasn't about to stop to grab it, so I just began screaming, I-80 at the top of my lungs. Finally, the phone heard me and gave me directions back to the highway. I drove around the area highways, stopping at gas stations to observe the other vehicles, getting off at least a few times to make sure that I wasn't being followed. Luckily, it was a pretty distinctive car, but still, I did this for over an hour before I felt safe enough to camp out. So, creepy bearded man, let's not meet. Pretty sure he was responsible. When I was 14 years old, my best friend Kate and I used to hang out together almost every night during summer. Her mother worked night shift, so I would go to her house in the evening after dinner, and then Kate and I would go for long, aimless walks until about midnight or 1 in the morning. Sometimes we would meet up with other kids from our school who might have beer or cigarettes to share, but usually we stuck to ourselves, just walking around the streets. It was so hot indoors that we preferred to be outside, and also it was a novelty for us to be out at night in public. Pretty normal teenage shit. One night, we went walking as usual, and we ended up in an area near downtown which I guess you describe as semi-industrial. Print shops, partial depots, small warehouses, that kind of thing. Since there were hardly any residential houses there, it was mostly empty and silent at night. And in retrospect, it was dumb to walk around there. But what can I say? We were indeed very dumb back then. We were walking down a street, and we came to a small warehouse. Out the front there was a man leaning against a low wall, smoking. He was short and skinny and obviously a deadbeat type, but not particularly threatening. He said hello, we said hello. We talked a bit, and he gave us a cigarette. We chatted for a while, and the conversation was mostly unmemorable. He asked us about school, and told us a bit about the adventures he used to have when he was our age, that kind of thing. He explained that his friend owned the warehouse, and was letting him stay there while he was in town. Kate and I weren't scared at all because we were together, and being out in the street, it was an open space, so not like he could easily corner us or anything. Eventually, he tried to encourage us to go into the warehouse with him. He had a TV there, and we could watch movies, he said. He had lots of beer and pot, and we were welcome to join him. Kate and I exchanged a look, and I could tell she was thinking the same as me. Hell no. But we didn't want to offend him, so we stayed very neutral and said we had to be getting home, and maybe some other night we'd stop by. Then he started getting more insistent, and things got weird. He pulled out his wallet and took out a Polaroid and showed it to us. The girl in the photo was his daughter, he said, and that she was lonely, and she'd really enjoy talking to us. We should come into the warehouse and hang out with her. The girl looked about our age, or maybe a year younger. She was wearing a man's flannel shirt, kind of like a dress, and it came down to her knees. Her legs were bare, couldn't see her feet. She didn't look like she was in obvious distress, but she wasn't smiling either. She just looked blank. She didn't look like she could be his daughter at all. Completely different complexion and features. Well, by now, Kate and I were ready to nope the fuck out of there. We said we had to go and started walking away. As we left, he muttered under his breath, really hatefully, "Fucking bitches." That pissed us off, and when we were a bit further down the street, we started yelling at him over our shoulders, stuff like fucking perv and loser. We kept this up all the way along the road, until we turned the corner. We did this because we were mad, but it was also to show him that we weren't meek. If he tried to start trouble with us, we would not go down quietly. He did walk to the center of the road to watch us go, but he didn't follow us. We got home safely and went to sleep, and that was that. Though we were definitely rattled by the experience. That photo, damn. Over the next few days, we debated whether or not we should tell our parents, but decided not to. He hadn't done anything, actually, and it would probably just mean we'd get in trouble for walking around at night, and no good would come from it. Instead, one afternoon, we decided to see if we could find the warehouse again and go past it during the day on our bikes. I don't know why we did this exactly. In retrospect, I think it was because we wanted to reassure ourselves that the warehouse was home to a legit business, and not some creepy rape factory or something. We rode around the streets for an hour or two, but we weren't able to find the warehouse again. I suppose because the whole area looked different during the day. Trucks, vans, people everywhere. We gave up and forgot about the whole thing. A bit later, I'm guessing about 2 to 3 months later, a local girl was reported missing. She was 16, a school dropout. We didn't know her. At first, there wasn't much media fanfare, because it was assumed she ran away from home willingly, probably to live with relatives up north. She was also from a troubled low-income family, which I'm sure didn't help her case either. However, some days later, everyone grew concerned because she hadn't used her bank account at all, or made any contact with her boyfriend or relatives. One day on the news, they showed some footage of a person of interest on the mall CCTV. He was the last person the girl was seen talking to, and there were some reports that she drove off with him. When I saw the footage, I got instant prickles up my arms, because though it was blurry as shit, I was almost certain it was the creepy warehouse guy. I just knew. I could tell from his gait and gestures. I called up Kate and told her she hadn't seen the news, and this was before the internet, so we had to wait, and then we called each other later that night and stayed on the phone together while the news came on. When they played the footage again, Kate was also sure there was an eerie silence between us, and then Kate suddenly said, "Fuck," really quietly, and I got those darn prickles again. We told our parents about everything, and the fallout. We got in so much shit. The next day, Kate's mother drove us around for several hours until we found the warehouse again. We just parked across the road for a bit. We didn't investigate further, obviously. It wasn't actually open and didn't seem to be an active business. Then we all went to the police. Kate and I had to give separate statements. It was really intimidating for me, even with my mother sitting next to me. The cops also berated me for walking around late at night, and at the time, I felt really indignant over this. Anyways, we told them about the warehouse and the Polaroid and everything, and they noted it all. For some reason, I had always assumed that if you gave the cops information about a crime, they kind of keep you updated on what they did with the information you provided. I don't know why I thought this, but I soon learned that the cops wouldn't tell you jack shit. My mother called the cops some days after I gave the statement, but they wouldn't tell her if anything came from the lead. I don't know if they checked the warehouse and tried to trace the creepy guy we met, but I assumed they did. The media didn't go into specifics, but they kept showing the mall footage and saying that the cops considered the guy to be a person of interest. They reported that the man was believed to have connections to local business and urged people to come forward. Around this time, Kate's mother contacted one of the scrummy current affairs TV shows that reports on scandals and true crime stuff, real tabloid shit, and not known for journalistic integrity. They wanted to do a story about Kate and I encountering the guy, with reenactments and everything. They paid quite well, about $1,500 each, which was a lot of money for a couple of 14-year-old kids. My parents wouldn't allow me to get involved, and eventually the TV show's legal team vetoed it because the cops weren't on board. Time went on, and the trail must have gone cold. No one ever heard from the girl again, and no one was arrested. Sometime later, about a year, another girl went missing, still in the same city but in a different area. She was a bit younger, 13, and from a good home. There was a lot more panic this time, and also reinvigorated the interest in the first girl's case. Everyone assumed that the cases were linked. This time the tabloid show contacted Kate's mother and tried to get Kate to do a segment, but again, nothing came of it. No one heard from the second girl again either. Time went by, people forgot. 6 years ago, the remains of the second girl were found in bushland. Just a few bits of skeleton and some jewelry. The first girl who went missing was never found. Nothing ever came up about the girl in the Polaroid. I don't know who she was or if she was even a victim at all. But that photo continues to haunt me to this day. I think about all 3 girls regularly. We live in different cities now, so I don't see Kate very often. Maybe once every couple of years or so. We still talk about this stuff though. It's always, what if? What if we did decide to join that creepy guy in the warehouse? Horrifying. The other question we ask ourselves is, what, if anything, we could have done differently, which might have prevented those 2 girls from going missing? I never doubted for a moment that the guy we met that night was the same guy who drove off with the first girl. The footage. Anyways, happy to answer any questions about this shit. So long, as it's not too dossy. These disappearances were very high profile in the city I grew up in, and many people know our story.